coming for you.
I'm Gary Kemp from the band Spandau Ballet, and this BBC World Service programme explores Ziggy Stardust was one of the most influential artistic creations of the 1970s. More than just a rock and roll superstar, this glamorous creature from outer space became the most iconic creation of the golden age of rock.
Ziggy played guitar, jamming good with Weird and Gilly.
The alter ego of David Bowie, one of the most innovative and influential forces in modern music. Ziggy's cocksure swagger and pouting androgyny appealed to pubescent working-class youth who realised that rock's long hair and denim were no longer enough to be outrageous.
I'm an alligator, I'm a mama, papa coming for you.
I'm Gary Kemp from the band Spandau Ballet, and this BBC World Service programme explores the inspiration behind the creation of Ziggy and the influence of the seminal album The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, which 40 years ago became the benchmark by which a generation would forever judge pop and youth culture. Ziggy was delivered to us in the summer of '72 as a fully formed alien rock star, an exotic being that represented the last pop star on a dying planet. A guitar-toting androgyne from outer space come to save this world's disaffected youth. But David's creation was the result of a fertile imagination, fueled by a diverse and fascinating catalogue of characters. He was born David Jones in Brixton, a suburb of South London, in 1947. One of his earliest musical epiphanies occurred at a performance by one of rock and roll's most outrageous performers, Little Richard, who David went to see with his school friend, George Underwood.
What was really impressive for David was when Little Richard stands up on top of his white grand piano and is singing away, and suddenly in the middle of a number, it's like, and holding his heart. And the band sort of slow down, stop. And David looks at me and says, "What's the matter with him?" I said, I don't know. It looks like he's having a heart attack or something. "Oh my God," he said, "we're watching Little Richard die in front of us." And the MC comes out and says, "Is there a doctor in the house?" and all that stuff, you know. And there he is lying down on the floor. And of course, the microphone wasn't too far away from him. And as everyone sort of crowded round him and they started moving back to their instruments, suddenly out came, and the house went crazy, everyone went mad. And if you think about that from a 14-year-old point of view who wants to create perhaps a character later on in their career, there's this element of, as in Ziggy, a rock and roll suicide, isn't there? Dying on stage was, ultimate way of going, wasn't it?
Little Richard's showmanship made a big impression on the 14-year-old David, who was determined to become a rock star. Over the next few years, he performed in several different groups, at various times experimenting as a mod, folkie, poet and a hippie, inspired by an assortment of writers, musicians and actors, including stage star Anthony Newley,
Rifle, rifle, told her it'll lie.
playwright Bertolt Brecht and mime artist Lindsay Kemp. David changed his surname to Bowie in 1967 to avoid confusion with the lead singer of the American group The Monkees, and scored his first chart hit in 1969 with the song Space Oddity.
This is ground control to Major Tom.
We would sit up all night sometimes talking about whether there were people looking down at us, as in Life from Mars type stuff.
Just want to know whose shirt you wear.
It was, at that time, something which everyone was looking at, UFOs, and we'd drift off into the fact that they definitely are here, so let's get used to it.
This is Major Tom to ground control.
A lot of his lyrics, I think, come from drunken evenings where we would just sit up talking nonsense, basically, about the possibilities of life on other planets.
The concept of life from outer space featured strongly in the music David was writing in early 1971 for his fifth album, as he began formulating ideas for an experimental character, Ziggy Stardust. The visual aspect of Ziggy took further shape when David went to see Andy Warhol's controversial production of Pork in London in August 1971.
Andy Warhol looks a scream, hang him on my
David loved the play's outrageous sexual content and met with Warhol at his factory in New York the following month and was very influenced by Andy's artistic philosophy. Lee Black Childers was one of Warhol's acolytes.
That's what the factory did. The factory did pretend things. When I first met Andy Warhol, he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I guess I want to be a photographer." And he said, "Well, then you're a photographer." And I said, "Well, I haven't had any lessons and I don't know anything." And he pointed across the room at Candy Darling, who was one of the great Warhol drag queens. And he said, "See her? Well, he says she's a woman, and so she is." And that's what you do. You just say whatever it is you are, and then that's what you are. Everyone will believe you.
In many ways, that's what Ziggy Stardust was to David Bowie, wasn't it?
That's exactly what we did. We just said, we are great, fabulous stars.
In New York, David also met Iggy Pop and Lou Reed, whose musical approach had a big impact on David. Trevor Bolder was David's bass player.
I'd seen Iggy perform or something and he thought, well, the punkish thing is the way to go, you know, to make a stamp on the music industry and to change his image and change what was going on.
While most British rock musicians at the time were looking to America for inspiration, David was drawing on European influences to colour his work. Producer Ken Scott worked extensively with David during the early 70s.
He's always said he's like a chef. He pulls all of these different things in and finishes up making his own stew, which becomes him.
People stare at the makeup on his face, laughed at his long black hair, his animal grace.
One of the rock and roll inspirations for Ziggy was Vince Taylor, an expatriate American rocker who moved to France and enjoyed a moderately successful career. One night, Vince went on stage dressed in white robes, exclaimed himself to be Jesus Christ and sacked his band, effectively committing rock and roll suicide.
Well, my baby drove up in a brand new Cadillac.
The story lodged in Bowie's imagination and fueled the creation of a doomed rock star whose stardom grew too big for a mortal to handle.
I ain't never come back.
As David was filtering all these disparate external influences, the songs he was writing for Ziggy evolved in Haddon Hall, a sprawling Victorian mansion in the southern London suburb of Beckenham, where David lived with his wife Angie, their young son Zoe, and an assortment of artists and musicians, including Trevor Bolder, guitarist Mick Ronson, and drummer Mick Woody Woodmansey.
He had a lounge at Haddon Hall and he'd go, "Woody, come in, I've just finished one," and he'd just sit and play it. You go, "Oh yeah, that's good."
So loud.
Then a couple of days later, going where the piano was, just finished this one. Oh yeah. So his writing drastically started to change.
As David's songs were evolving, so was his appearance, and Stanley Kubrick's film, A Clockwork Orange, was a major inspiration. Trevor Bolder.
He wanted us to dress in like the boiler suits, but colourful with the boots. You know, everybody thought that we were dressing like spacemen, but we weren't. They called them droogs, I think. We were actually modelled on Clockwork Orange.
In order to create the clothes David wanted Ziggy to wear, he enlisted the help of his designer friend, Freddie Beretti, as Woody remembers.
And he was a great tailor. When he made something, it was made for you. It did fit. It was like, whoa, I've never had a jacket like that before.
The tongues of the storm come to the show tonight. Wings of a life machine.
David's entourage were all involved in the selection of materials for the new outfits Freddie created for the band.
The whole band and Angie went to Dickens and Jones and Liberties and just went through the material department. It was like, oh, that'll work, that's nice, you know. We was going, yeah, it's all right. I like blue, you know what I mean? Things like that. Pink, don't know about pink. Well, you're a man, you can take pink. Yeah, okay, I'll have the pink then.
Sue lived in the basement, and Sue used to look after Zoe when David was busy, and she was a seamstress, and she made all the original clothes for the Spiders, and the guy who owned the superstore in Beckenham made the boots.
Along with the colourful new suits, David decided he needed a new hairstyle. So Angie introduced him to her local hairdresser, Susie Fusay.
I saw her and David walking down Beckenham High Street. He was in a dress, she was in pants, and they were pushing Zoe in a pram. So that set Beckenham High Street alight.
I'm an alligator. I'm a mama, papa coming for you.
And then she invited me up to do David's hair, and he had long blonde hair at the time.
In Laura McCall style.
Yeah. He said, well, what would you do? And I said I would cut it off because everybody else had long hair. It was T-Rex, it was this one and that one. Of course, he had a gorgeous face, long, slim neck, and a very slender body with a waist. So we looked at all these different magazines, and I cut his hair off. And it was the Ziggy cut with a little blonde thing in the front, and points down the back and points down here. They rung me a couple of days later. David was freaking out because his hair was just going. And I went over there and dyed it red. Red hot red, Schwarzkopf red hot red with 30 to give it an extra bit of lift. I found this fantastic setting lotion that was for dandruff called Guard, and it set your hair solid. I mean solid. So I put a bit of that on and we dried up and it stuck straight up. It was great.
Susie then helped the rest of the band create similar styles. Lee Woodmansey.
There's this stuff called guck. It was a trick of the trade. If somebody wanted a bit more backcombed or whatever, they would put this guck on. So they used that and made his hair stand up. And he went, I want it dyeing red. And we went, whoa. Then walked in after he'd had it done, and there wasn't the hair out of place. It was just perfect. And he went, whoa, that is good. I want mine blonde and do the same, you know.
Initially, there was some resistance to the outrageous stage outfits from the band members, who were all from the seaside town of Hull in the north of England and had spent their musical careers wearing just jeans and T-shirts. Here's bass player Trevor Boulder.
When he originally tried to get us to wear the makeup, you know, Ronson being from the north, I'm bloody going to do that to me, I'm not wearing that. I think he was ready to go back to Hull when Bowie mentioned that. But we wore it not as a glam rocky type thing. He wore it as a theatre type makeup. Because he said if you don't wear makeup, your face won't stand out on stage. You won't project enough. You need to put something on. That's why actors wear makeup. And of course then everybody else jumped on it and started wearing too much makeup.
Once the outfits had been created to accompany the exciting new music he had written, it was time for David to introduce his creation to the world. Here's George Underwood.
Standing in front of the mirror, I can see David looking at himself thinking, now, what shall I call you? Ziggy Stardust. Yeah, that's a good one. Let's do that.
The first few appearances of Ziggy Stardust and his Spiders from Mars in their full costumes weren't received well by some audiences who struggled to grasp the concept.
Now Ziggy played guitar, jamming good with Weird and Gilly and the Spiders from Mars. He played it left hand, but made it too far. Became the special man. Then we were Ziggy's band.
The first Ziggy stuff, the clothes and that, we'd get the first 4 rows giving us rude signs. We got booed off and we got bottles thrown. I was ducking beer cans and also they didn't like it at all.
He could lick 'em by smiling. He could leave them to hide.
And some people working in the music industry were of the same opinion.
Well hung Snow White tie.
David's publicist at the time was Anya Wilson.
When trying to get him on TV, I was told by one of the producers, who used to produce occasionally Top of the Pops and a specialty show, that, you know, they didn't have perverts on their show.
So we bitched about his fans and should we clutch his sweet hand. Oh.
While the visual image was confusing for some, David's record company RCA was confused by the music. When the Ziggy album was finished, RCA couldn't decide on a track to release as a single, so they told him to write a more commercial song.
Didn't know what time it was, the lights were low, oh, oh. I leaned back on my radio, oh, oh.
David wrote Starman, which satisfied the record company, but not everyone in the band. Woody Woodmansey.
Mick and I said, ooh, not 100% sure about that. That was the edge. You know, we were questioning, is it, ooh, just a bit too much? That was right on the line. It was still okay, but it was right on the...
There's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He's told us not to blow it, 'cause he knows it's all worthwhile. He told me, let the children lose it, let the children use it, let all the children boogie.
Slowly, the public began to appreciate this exciting new form of rock theatre, and eventually Ziggy was booked on to a few television shows. In July 1972, David performed the song Starman on the British TV programme Top of the Pops in full Ziggy glory, and his performance lit the touch paper for thousands of kids who up until then had struggled to find a catalyst for their lives. That performance changed my life completely. I was a wide-eyed boy of 12, and my passion was fired by this flame-haired Mephistophelian messenger from space performing rock and roll in Technicolor. Next to him, in superhero boots, his flaxen-haired buddy Mick Ronson rode shotgun with a golden guitar. As my singing starman draped his arm around Mick, I felt a frisson of desire and wanted to go to their planet. I had witnessed the visitation from a world of glitter, and that night I planned my future, and I wasn't alone. My school playground was soon bristling with Ziggy's bog brush hairstyle, and the more daring among us even went orange. An effeminate, pale young man in eyeshadow had somehow connected with working-class flash, and gender bending was suddenly far more rebellious than drugs and violence, especially when in an interview with a music magazine, David claimed he was bisexual. Here's Anya Wilson again.
I think he wasn't above the shock tactics, and I think him announcing it was really revolutionary to a lot of young people.
Where he got it right, which is fascinating, is I was a working class lad, and the most macho working class boys of my age, 13, 14, 15, loved him. It fitted our world of being outrageous. It wasn't enough just to have long hair and outrage your parents, because we'd all been doing that for years. David Cassidy did that.
Yeah, what we noticed, you're right, with a lot of fans and working class towns, whatever, would come to the gigs, they would dress up like Ziggy, they would all say, I'm gay, I'm bisexual, whether they were or not, and it did a lot for sexual freedom.
David gave us the license to fantasize about ourselves and to create characters for ourselves, and his fans lived out his art.
It was confusing. You know, because if you happened to go walk about, you'd go, and you'd just be about to shout Mick or Trev, and it was not him.
You could see yourself in the audience because somebody had copied the way you looked and everything, you know. So the whole audience was actually Ziggy Stardust and Spanish from Mars. You were all part of it. It wasn't a venue.
Ziggy became a huge international hit, and after inhabiting this crazy alien for 18 months, David decided that life should imitate art, and just as he had described in his lyrics, he killed off Ziggy at a concert at London's Hammersmith Odeon in 1973.
Not only is it the last show of the tour, but it's the last show that we'll ever do.
I was in the audience that night and was stunned when he made the surprise announcement. And so was some of the band.
Time takes a cigarette.
Here's Woody.
I didn't know if it was a stunt. I didn't know if that was just for effect, just for a complete withdrawal at that moment in time to create that effect, because I didn't know anything about it.
Well, the wall-to-wall is calling.
Trevor Boulder.
It lingers, but
I was the same. What's he on about? You know? And I looked round at Woody, and he looked at me like he was shaking his head.
you're a rock and roll suicide.
We were supposed to go to America 3 days later. And of course, after the show, he said, "Oh, well, that's it. You know, I'm not doing Ziggy anymore. I'm not going to America. I don't know what I'm going to do. Blah 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 blah." And that's the end of it.
And the clock waits so patiently on your song.
He couldn't carry on being Ziggy Stardust. He was becoming Ziggy Stardust. For a man that talented, who had lots of other things he wanted to do, he needed to retire it.
Oh, you're a rock and roll suicide. Now the ship breaks a snarling as you stumble across the room.
George Underwood.
When he did the Hammersmith, when he said this is the last gig, he had to draw a line under him and say, right, Ziggy, you are no longer, just because he wants other things he needed to do. And I'm sure by that time he's been influenced by all sorts of other music. That wouldn't have fitted in with Ziggy, I don't think. And he didn't want to pursue Ziggy anymore as he was taking over his life.
Oh no, love, you're not alone. You're watching yourself, but you're too unfair.
I mean, us recording it and being involved in it, I think is completely different to people who bought the record, because they didn't see the side of it that we'd done, how we grew to be that band and stuff. And you know, as being a musician, when you make it, you don't really appreciate
The myth.
what you've done. Yeah, the myth. And I think for a lot of other people who it changed their lives, I think that was their great thing, and we didn't really appreciate the making of it enough.
You're not alone.
And it was so short-lived for us as a band, really, and it'd gone, but it's still there for us forever.
You're not alone.
Ziggy Stardust allowed a generation of us to experience rock and roll as performance art for a postmodern world. What David did was set the benchmark for theatre and rock music. Ziggy was about the fantasy of being in a rock band, and many, like me, decided that was the planet they wanted to be on. And music would never be the same again.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, we love you.
Ziggy changed my life as a 10-ounce production.